So simply saying because he was able to speak does not mean that he wasn't that his oxygen wasn't being restricted. And again, both coroners say this. If you were the officer that was like subduing George Floyd and he was already laying down on the ground with it, and handcuffed, would you feel the need to leave your knee on his neck? If someone chooses to enforce that specifically against a very specific group of people, then that's what we would call oppression. So, all right, the first thing that we wanted to talk about was this George Floyd death, right? And your thing was, you were saying that you don't believe Derek Chauvin was responsible for his death.
Well, I'm kind of hearing twice. Do I have to be on Twitch or?
No, you we're just chatting here. You can close the
Okay. Well,
you can close
okay,
Twitch.
gotcha. Okay, gotcha. Okay. You said your question was with the Derek Chauvin thing. You're just ask it one more time because it was kind of hearing twice and I couldn't really hear.
No problem. So your belief is that Derek Chauvin was not responsible for George Floyd's death, right?
Correct.
Okay. And since you don't believe that Derek Chauvin is responsible, what do you think killed George Floyd?
I believe I believe the drugs killed George Floyd and his exaggeration of his exaggeration of movement and just kind of doing the most and kind of played a part with this in large part. So I think ultimately, I guess the best way to put it, I guess for the better the argument, George Floyd could have prevented his death. It's the better. It's more the better argument I'm trying to make.
Okay. So George Floyd could have prevented his death. I hear you saying that. Do you think Derek Chauvin could have prevented George Floyd's death?
I mean, if you're saying if you're saying the knee was never placed on his back, I think that's kind of hard to make that case since they tried to put him in the truck in the first place. Because George Floyd was the one that requested to be laid down. So unless you're saying the fact that he laid down and the knee was on his back, if he never put his knee on his back, maybe he could have survived. I mean, I don't really think I can necessarily deny that. I just believe that if George Floyd would have simply complied and just got in the truck, then none of that would even happen in the first place.
Okay. Just to be clear, someone not complying doesn't mean that they deserve to die. Let me address the thing that you were talking about the drugs in his system. So he had, according to the toxicology report, 11 nanograms per milliliter. That was a concentration of fentanyl in his blood, right?
Right.
Okay. He also had 5.6 nanograms per milliliter of norfentanyl. Do you know what norfentanyl is?
Not specifically, no.
Okay. Norfentanyl,
Uh,
it norfentanyl is the thing that it's when your body starts breaking down fentanyl, when it starts to metabolize fentanyl, it produces something called norfentanyl, right?
okay.
And so
Okay.
the presence of 5.6 nanograms per milliliter of norfentanyl means that his body had already begun metabolizing the drug.
Okay.
That's a significant amount. So then it wasn't a sudden overdose, right? Because if it was such an amount that would cause an overdose, then he wouldn't. Then typically when someone dies from fentanyl overdose, they don't have norfentanyl in their body because the fentanyl caused them to overdose, and then their body can't metabolize the drug once they're dead. So that's why you wouldn't see high amounts of norfentanyl. But in George Floyd's case, we saw a lot of norfentanyl, meaning metabolized, already processed and broken down by the body fentanyl. The amount, the 11 nanograms of milliliter, like in that concentration, can be lethal in like individuals who have no opioid tolerance. But because George Floyd had been a frequent opioid user or had some tolerance, then that would not be lethal for him. And furthermore, again, the presence of norfentanyl, those two things, his prior usage his prior usage of opioids, the presence of norfentanyl indicate that the drug itself wasn't enough to cause an overdose. So the overdose was not what killed George Floyd.
So yeah, so I'm not making a claim of overdose. But before I get into that, let me ask: could whatever what you just said, could that potentially prevent somebody from breathing?
Would an overdose of fentanyl would prevent someone from breathing, but just taking the drug and processing and metabolizing it would not prevent someone from breathing. No.
Okay, okay, all right. So, well, why couldn't George Floyd breathe before he even laid down on the ground? Why did he have trouble breathing then?
I think there maybe you could say excitement, panic, all of those things can like cause someone to start feeling shortness of breath. For well, I'm answering your question. Furthermore, like having your hands placed behind your back already restricts like breathing, like automatically. So I would say a combination of the panic, excitement, anxiety, and having your hands like being restrained in that way. All three of those things would exacerbate breathing problems.
And do you not think fentanyl plays a part in that as well, regardless if it's been metabolized or not?
I don't know fentanyl to cause shortness of breath. I can look that up really quick. Do you like do you know if that's the thing?
Well, no. That's why I'm asking. But the reason I'm asking is because, okay, I think it's kind of odd that you can say, okay, maybe put your hands behind somebody's back and prevent that, but fentanyl does not. Um, I mean, I've had my hands behind my back plenty of times. Not in case of being arrested, but in the general sense, I could be standing and have my arms behind my back. If you're playing, if you played the sports before, you kind of get uh, into different, not sets, but uh, you run in or whatever, you're trying to catch your breath. A lot of times, you stand up, and a lot of times people put their hands behind their back. So it's kind of new to kind of hear that. Um, so I'm just kind of just going off just basic experience. I mean, you don't really hear a lot of time people not breathing with their hands behind their back. So, but I'm not gonna deny what you just said. I just think that's kind of odd.
Sure.
But
Wait, hold on. Let
um,
me address that because again, I totally agree with you. If you like take that one thing in isolation, it probably wouldn't cause that much of a problem. But again, it would be all of them together, right? So just having your hands behind your back probably wouldn't be that big of a deal, right? But having your hands behind your back
right,
in a state of anxiety and a state of whatever, then that would be a big deal, right? Someone can be literally like completely prostrate, right, like on the ground or something, and but
right,
being depressed or being like highly emotional, like hearing about a death or something. All of those things can like cause what would normally be like just regular breathing that they would cause like in problems. And so in this scenario, it's not just putting your arms behind your back, which 100% does cause restriction in breathing, maybe not such a severe amount, but so that would be a thing that, coupled with excitement and anxiety, given the high stress of that situation, literally would cause like more struggles in breathing. Like literally just stress alone impacts breathing, right? We know this. So then if you're
right.
in a highly stressed situation dealing with the police, and complicating that by putting your hands behind your back, those two things combined should be enough to cause restriction in breathing, right? Now, not enough that it's going to like make you pass out, not enough that it's going to kill you. We're just talking about that's why you would find restrictions in breathing. The panic and the way he was constrained, both of those things would cause that.
Right. Okay. So, and again, not, I'm actually accepting it, but I'm also adding the fact that his heart was enlarged due to the drugs. So I think that's where we're kind of parting ways. It's like you're not really trying to add that fact, but I'm adding that
we
fact
we can
along
we
with
can
what
go
you
there
just said.
next, but we just haven't gone there yet. Right now we were just talking about the drug
Oh,
usage. We can get to the heart
well,
thing afterwards, but for now
well,
we were dealing with the drug thing. So you do concede that the fentanyl and the presence of norfentanyl indicate that he did not die from an overdose, as a bunch of right wing
oh
pundits and
yeah,
all those
yeah,
people
no,
say.
no, 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 yeah. I'm not. Yeah, I don't. I never used the word overdose. I
Okay.
think, like I said, I always made the claim that it was the combination of, like you said, anxiety, him kind of overexerting himself, and the enlarged heart due to him taking the drug. I don't necessarily believe it was an overdose of the drugs.
But you don't believe that the knee on the neck had anything to do with it.
No, I just think it was bad optics.
So
That's why I don't really feel. That's why I don't really feel. empty towards Derek Chauvin. I mean, I just think it was more politics and more bad optics. But no, I think if the knee truly played a part, he would have died way earlier than 8 minutes.
Okay, so explain to me why did the coroner say that the knee of the neck, what I mean that the neck compression was his cause of death, both of them.
You want to know my true opinion?
Sure.
My true opinion is it was political based. They wanted to set it up to where officer was the reason this man died.
What do you think was the motivation of that? Like what? Like okay. Let me say it this way.
Okay.
The first autopsy was done like literally the morning after the morning after. I think it was completed by 9 a.m. the next morning, right? And
Okay.
so this coroner, right?
What doctor did that? Do you remember the name of that doctor?
I don't remember his name. I'm terrible with names, but I know it was the
Okay,
official
okay.
one done by the state.
Okay.
You know, the guy who typically works with the police officers, and you know the one who typically does that. Him.
Yeah.
He did that.
Yeah. Okay.
I can find his name really quick. Let me see. It is Floyd Perry. No, no,
Okay.
no, 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 no. That's not it. That's not it. Andrew Baker. There we go.
Okay.
Okay. So
Gotcha.
Andrew Baker, that guy, he did the he did his autopsy. It's written down as 9:25 a.m.
Okay.
So that's about 12 hours after George Floyd dies. This thing was turned in. So it's not like we can say that this coroner or pathologist. It's not like we can say that this guy knew the extent of the civil unrest and everything that would unfold, right? So it's not like that should have been a motivator. He's just doing his job like he does in any other scenario before the entire world was galvanized into marching and the uprisings and everything that happened. So what I don't see any evidence that would have motivated him, considering it hadn't gotten to the scale that it eventually became long after he did his autopsy.
Okay. Yeah. So what I was looking at, Amy Sweezy, which was a county prosecutor in Hepburn, she said she made a call to Dr. Baker, and we're told the response from Dr. Baker that there was no medical findings that showed any injury to the vital structure of Mr. Floyd's neck. There were no medical indication of asphyxia. I'm probably butchering that, but ASPHYXIA or strangulation.
Yeah.
So and that, so yeah, that's what the prosecutor got from Dr. Baker, which admitted that Dr. Baker Dr. Baker admitted to being coerced to originally saying that it was due to the knee.
But wait, hold on. I need to follow this. You're saying after he wrote this autopsy, he went and called someone and said that it was that.
The prosecutor called Dr. Baker.
Okay. And wait, hold on. No, because actually, yeah, Dr. Baker went on the stand afterwards, and he like testified that was like completely taken out of context, and that was not what he was indicating, because that prosecutor was trying to make the claim that he had said, oh, it wasn't that, and it was a potential drug overdose, and that's not what he was saying. He literally wrote in his report, the thing that we all can read now, that it was like subdual asphyxia, subdual neck compression, subdual restraint. That's what it said. So like,
Yeah.
so his comments are there. Like he literally said that this was caused by asphyxiation. So maybe someone can lie. I don't know that person, but like the person can say the person can say that he said something, and we can take their word for it if we choose to. But what he put his license on the line and wrote down in his actual report, we have it there before he spoke to her, before any of the other unrest happens or any of those things, and he wrote down that it was asphyxia.
Yeah, well, I guess at this point, just based on who you rather believe. So I don't believe it. So you probably believe it. So I think that's really what it just boils down to.
No, it's not a matter of belief. It's first off, it's not. Yeah, it's not.
It is.
It's not. I can
So you
explain
can
why
say
it's not. It's not a matter of belief. It'd be a matter of belief of choosing to believe her testimony. But I'm saying like this was a matter of medical expertise, right? This is a matter of like him putting his license on the line, doing his job, which is something he's been doing for quite some time, and him coming to this conclusion. Secondly, it was also they did an independent, another pathologist, right? They did another autopsy report, like that was independently paid for, and that person came to the same conclusion. So, like, I mean, I don't know. So now we have to think that the first one lied, right, on his report, and just for no reason. Then the second one lied on his report also, and came to similar conclusions.
No, see, okay, again, we differ. You said no reason. I disagree. There was a reason. I would wait and expand upon that. So the reason why I believe that Dr. Baker could have lied because of the climate. Of course, of Black Lives Matter. For one, during that whole sequence, they trashed the whole city, was burned it up. So you can imagine if they was to say that Chauvin uh, didn't kill, or Soviet knee wasn't the reason for how ballistic everybody would have went. So that's why I believe it was a political stunt. Again, I'm not necessarily defending the show. I just think it was bad optic. You know, that's my case. But no, I do not believe his knee was the reason that led to George Floyd's death.
Yeah. Okay. So let me ask you this: when in the video when it's happening, George Floyd was originally responsive while he was laying on the ground, right?
Right.
And he told told Derek Chauvin multiple times that he could not breathe, right?
Right.
Okay. While this was happening, people who were filming and people who were like close by were yelling at Chauvin, and they were telling him, "You're killing him," right?
I mean, they can say it, but they don't necessarily mean
Right,
that.
but they were telling him, "You're killing him," right?
Okay. Yeah, they were saying it.
Okay, so they were saying you're killing him because obviously, for most people, we would think leaving your knee on someone's neck long enough could eventually cause them to die, right? And so they were telling him that this was happening. Then, after George Floyd stopped being responsive, he maintained his knee on the same on his neck still, with people still actively yelling at him. He's not breathing. He's not responsive. You're still, and he was still on his neck. He didn't switch positions. So it's crazy to me that I'm supposed to suspend like the authority of the person who did of the pathologist, right? I'm supposed to like suspend that authority. I'm supposed to ignore the second autopsy report. I'm supposed to ignore common sense that says knee on the neck for enough time can eventually kill someone. I'm supposed to ignore like what I saw in the video, right? I'm supposed to, everyone else was able to see and call it out in advance. What you're doing is killing him and will kill him. I'm supposed to ignore all of that and just believe, nope, it wasn't any of those things. It was his enlarged heart. It was his stress or any of those things. That sounds crazy.
Oh, I mean, I'm not telling you to ignore anything. I'm
Well, I would
just
have
telling
to in
you.
order to believe that.
Well, no, because that's why I made it clear what you asking for my opinion. So that's all I gave was my opinion. So like I said, I think a lot of times we get caught up in the actual incident itself and not necessarily looking at the totality. So again, like I said in the beginning, my whole argument was George Floyd could have prevented his death. So, and what I mean by that is when the police originally came. So in the beginning, when he originally came and it was put under handcuffs, they had him in the truck. He was the one complaining, crying, I'm claustrophobic, I'm doing it. He didn't have to do none of that. All he had to do was just sit in the truck, and then they could have took him to the jail.
I
Now he requested. So hold on.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So yeah. So at that point, when he requested to be laid down, now you can make the argument they should never did in the first place. They maybe he should have gone ahead and kept him in there and just not even answer his request. But then you will see how people complain about that. He said he couldn't breathe, and they put him in the truck. So I think that's where I'm getting at. Regardless of what the police would have did, everybody would have made it a big deal about what's going on. So let's say he really couldn't. Like I said, he made the claim he couldn't breathe while he was sitting in the truck. So who's to say he wasn't already dying then?
Okay.
Because he already said. So you know what I'm saying. That's the fact. So again, I get it from an optic standpoint, but even looking at the whole video, I just do not believe. Based on what I saw, his foot was directly on his neck, maybe close to it at some part, but it was also at some parts of the back and the shoulder blade. But the main thing that I'm just getting at, there was not enough pressure from his knee on his neck. There was no bruises. There was no type of strangulation preventing him from breathing. And then my last point was, if it was, it wouldn't have taken 8 minutes on top of him already said he couldn't breathe. That's just my main point.
Okay, let me update really quickly because I haven't talked about this in a very, very long time as it's an old case. I just read it again. What it said was cardiopulmonary arrest complicating law enforcement, subdual restraint, and neck compression. That's what it actually says. So it wasn't asphyxiation. I misspoke there. Or not misspoke, I just made an error. I had forgotten. But yes, it was actually cardiopulmonary arrest, meaning his heart stopped, right? And it says complicating law enforcement, subdual restraint, and neck compression. And his heart stopped because of the neck compression, right? That's what this is saying. And that neck compression eventually prevents enough oxygen so that his heart eventually stops. That's what happened. That's what the coroner said. It didn't say asphyxiation, right? And let me explain how this works, okay? When you say it shouldn't take 8 minutes, there are degrees, right, to where you can like block someone's airways or you can block someone's air. A perfect example of this, right? We've all experienced it before. If you've ever been like under like a comforter and a sheet and you have both of them over your head such that there's not a lot of oxygen coming in, you will start to feel labored breathing, where it starts feeling heavier and harder to breathe, to where eventually you need to take the covers away in order to get like really full breath. Like sitting in that scenario, like being in that scenario with labored breathing, you're not gonna die right away. Like it's not like your breath completely stops as like to the same as someone like entirely compressing your neck and strangling you, but you do start to feel that loss of oxygen until eventually the oxygen will run out, and then eventually you will die. Or like there have been cases where people have been trapped, right? Like blockaded by like I don't know, like a rock or something, or by rocks or something, right? And like in a small area. And to where people are breathing in the beginning and they're talking and so on and so forth, but eventually the oxygen runs out slowly over time, and then eventually they die. So when it comes to like someone restricting your breathing, or in this case with his knee on his neck, it doesn't have to happen right away. It's not something where it doesn't have to be where it's enough to immediately strangle you, where it completely blocks your passageway. If it just cuts off 50%, even 50%, over time, if you sit in that scenario for long enough, you will eventually pass out. And if that continues even after you've passed out, you will eventually die. And that's exactly what happened to him. So simply saying because he was able to speak does not mean that he wasn't that his oxygen wasn't being restricted. And again, both coroners say this.
Okay. Well, let me ask, could the argument be made? Can the argument be made that his breath was being restricted before that happened due to the fact he said he couldn't breathe already?
However, we've already addressed this. Yes, I believe that he was already having labored breathing.
Okay.
But the labored breathing would be caused by one, the panic, right, being involved, whatever, in the high stress situation and anxiety. Both of those are like causes of restriction in breath. And then third, again, putting both of your arms behind your back automatically compresses your lungs in such a way that causes labored breathing. So I would say that yes, that highly charged, anxiety-inducing, panicked situation with that type of posture or whatever of constraint would inhibit someone's breathing to some degree. Now, after he was laid down, even still with his hands behind his back, yes, it's still somewhat labored breathing, right? But it still shouldn't be. It wouldn't typically be enough to be lethal. But then when you complicate that even more by having someone sit on someone, right? Then putting their pressure on them, and then putting pressure specifically on the neck, like all of those things combined start creating a catastrophe. And to address the thing you were saying about had George Floyd just acted differently, listen, for me, it's really hard to put the onus on the individual for not acting differently, because ultimately I'm going to tie it based on the person who had the authority in the situation and chose to leave his knee on that man's neck. What you're saying would be the equivalent. Let me give you an equivalent analogy. Say you have some guy who was robbed, I don't know, burglarizing a store, or I don't know, a child, a 14-year-old who's stealing a freaking candy bar or something from a freaking store, and now you have loss prevention, I don't know, chasing after him, and they like indicate, like they wave down a cop, and the cop is chasing the person down too, and then eventually the cop gets him, subdues the person, and then shoots him in the head 5 times. Now you might make the argument, well, had he not resisted, or had he not ran away from in the first place, had he not stolen, then he would still be alive. And I would probably agree with you. But I would still, even though I can say these actions might have prevented your death altogether, sure, I'm going to say the ultimate responsibility falls on the officer who chose to unload his gun into this kid's head. So in the same sense, while I can say, yes, maybe George Floyd could have acted differently and that would have prevented things. Maybe whatever happened in the grocery store, that called the police there in the first place, could have not happened and that could have been different. Maybe had he like been completely complicit and just been very, very passive in the entire situation, maybe things would have ended differently. Possibly. But what I can say, considering all of those things, none of that justifies Derek Chauvin putting his knee on his neck for almost 8 minutes. That's where the problem comes in. You put your knee on his neck and that led to his death according to the autopsy. So then that means ultimately you're responsible. Now we can say maybe like indirectly responsible by if he used a counterfeit dollar, or if he happened to have, resist arrest or whatever the freak else. But the ultimate and direct responsibility in this situation is Derek Chauvin, because none of those things justify him leaving his knee on his neck for that long.
Okay, so maybe we can have some common ground here. So can we both admit that maybe can we both at least say both were wrong? Because I can.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think resisting arrest and all of those things, and fighting against the officer and all that stuff, and not being complicit. Sure, I can say that's wrong. I can say it's not worthy of his death. I can say it doesn't exonerate Derek Chauvin, because even though he's wrong, the ultimate and direct cause of death is still that knee on his neck.
So I mean, like I said, I don't really agree with that. I just think it was bad optics. So again, and I'm not defending Derek Chauvin. He's really not that big of a deal to me. Um, my point is that I just believe if he would just act differently and just complied a little better, he would still been alive. Now that's just my argument, but I'm more than willing to say both were wrong in the situation.
Yeah, but that's really reductive. Let me ask you this. If you were the officer that was like subduing George Floyd and he was already laying down on the ground with his, and handcuffed, would you feel the need to leave your knee on his neck? Would you feel the need to literally leave your pressure of your body on top of that man as he's laying down in that way? Now that he's like completely subdued, would you continue to stay there even when he's non-responsive? Obviously not. Neither would I, or most sane people. Most human beings would not do that. So the fact of the matter is, even if you want to try to be reductive and just say, well, both people did something wrong, the ultimate wrong is the ultimate wrong is in the willful and conscious negligence by Derek Chauvin leaving himself in that situation, which is going to kill this man, as everyone could see. If I told you just at random, hey, there's a guy and he's going to put his knee on someone's neck for 8 minutes, do you think that that's possible, that can lead to death? I think you would say, yeah, that sounds really freaking dangerous and I wouldn't advise it. You knew better. People were yelling at you, literally yelling at you, while you have a smug look on your face and try to pretend as if you don't care. So you're sitting there while people are literally screaming at you at the top of their lungs, you're killing him, you're gonna kill him, he's gonna die. So when that's happening at that point, that's a level of callous. So you can say, oh, well, he was wrong for resisting, but to try to equate these two is disgusting. You're saying I'm comparing someone resisting arrest and being belligerent to someone literally willfully leaving a knee onto someone's neck until they die. How are these even remotely close to the same thing? To put those two in the same sentence is disgusting.
So are you saying George Floyd didn't know any better?
I'm saying it's disgusting to compare the two, because one is literally murdering someone and then the other one is someone acting in a panic. How are we comparing panic versus willful conscious murder? They're not the same thing.
I want you to answer my question. Did George Floyd know better?
I already answered that question.
So yes, right, he's a grown adult, right?
Sure. Did Derek Chauvin know better?
For sure. They both was wrong. Like
okay, good. So he's a grown man who knew better and still actively murdered someone.
And is he not in jail?
Okay, so you think he should be in jail? So you do find him responsible? Okay, I thought maybe we were having a different conversation. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm not defending. I never. I know what I'm saying. I say I'm not defending. I just think it was a bad look optically, but I just still believe George Floyd could have prevented his death. That's all
Oh,
the argument
okay.
I was making.
Okay, I'm sorry. So then let me make sure that we're crystal clear here. I agree with you. Optically, it did look really, really bad. Optically, I don't like the fact that George Floyd like resisted. I don't like, just the whole altercation. I don't like any of it. But Derek Chauvin is absolutely responsible for his death.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. I like that. I'm more so would say both, but again, I'm not defending him if he's in jail. I do think the political atmosphere played a part in that as well.
Oh,
So
it definitely did. There's no doubt that the political atmosphere played a part in it because obviously we know that like police officers and just people in general get away with murdering black people all the time, right? Or brutalizing or whatever. Damage to black people is constantly not
yeah,
atoned for. So like, yeah, that's of course because there was such a global uprising in response to this, then it made all the sense in the world that yes, that probably had a play in why he was actually convicted because most of the time they have, qualified immunity and then they just use that and then they won't even indict the officers. I mean, look at the Philando Castile case. That dude was ultimately responsible for Philando Castile dying, but no, still he wasn't indicted, right? So ultimately, like the charges weren't, they didn't stick. So my point being, yeah, sure, the political landscape had a lot to do with why Derek Chauvin is in prison right now. Without a doubt. But that doesn't. It's a shame that it took that much in order for people to be willing to convict this officer who was clearly guilty of murdering this man. But yeah, that's a thing. It happens. Okay, so yeah, sure. I'm willing perfectly to concede. I don't even think it's a concession because I would have admitted that from the very beginning that yes, that the politics had something to do with Derek Chauvin being in prison. But politics has nothing to do with his guilt. Politics has nothing to do with his ultimate responsibility for the death of George Floyd. That's not because of politics.
like I said, we can meet there. Like I said, I think we can kind of stay, meet at the George. I mean not George, but Derek Chauvin playing for the paying consequence for his actions, and and maybe George Floyd, could have did a little better. So I think we can meet at that middle ground.
Sure. Let's expound on that middle ground just a little bit more, right?
Okay.
If George Floyd never used a counterfeit bill, I'm not sure if that actually happened, but let's say that he did. If he never used a counterfeit bill at that store, then the police would have never been called, and so on and so forth, right? And so then he would probably still be
Right.
alive today.
Right.
Right. Okay. And there's two things. One, that obviously indicates that you didn't really believe that it was just him, his heart, or just his fentanyl, or just any of those other things that killed him. Because
No, no, no,
you
no,
just
no, no,
indicated that you believe that the
no,
police
no, no, no,
interaction is
no.
what killed him. Because
No.
if the police weren't there, he would still be
Hold
alive.
on, hold on, fanatic. No, 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 no. Because in the beginning, I said the combination of his heart plus the anxiety and the overexertion of the situation. So, which is what you already admitted to as well. That was my old claim.
I'm not.
So,
I'm saying that
no,
I'm saying that would labor someone's breathing. I'm not saying that would kill him. So, but
no, no,
ultimately,
no.
but yeah, but I just wanted that in
Oh,
context in framing, right? Because then now we can have the things that we're comparing or the things that we're like kind of juxtaposing,
right.
right? So it's like the
Oh,
juxtaposition is he used a fake $20 bill, which resulted in the police and everybody getting involved, and Derek Chauvin murdered him. Like that's the thing that we're like juxtaposing. So George Floyd could have done things better by not using that bill, and Derek Chauvin could have just
yeah.
not murdered George Floyd. And I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, I wasn't saying the drugs alone was the reason. No, that's not what I was saying. Because again, if like you said, because he's apparently already on drugs when he used. So just say he used a regular 20 and went on about his day. I'm not saying just because he was on drugs or whatever that he's gonna die regardless. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. So okay. Yeah. All right. So yeah, that is the middle ground. George Floyd acted irresponsibly. Derek Chauvin murdered a man, and though that's where and okay, we can find that. The other thing you were talking about in the Discord, it was about systemic oppression, right?
Oh yeah,
Okay. And you don't believe that there is any systemic oppression existing in the United States today?
no.
How do you define systemic oppression?
I define systemic depression laws denying a certain race from learning, reading, um, getting the opportunities of jobs, um, and building family and Do I get not having rights?
Okay, so if there, say, say there's no, if there's a, say police just decided we're going to ignore marijuana smoke by white people, but specifically prosecute marijuana smoke by black people, would that be systemically oppressive?
I'll kind of ask that one more time. I want to make sure I'm understanding the question.
If police made the decision that they were going to ignore marijuana smoke by white people, but prosecute marijuana smoke by black people, would that be systemically oppressive?
Just police just deciding that? I don't think they can just decide that.
If they did, would that be systemically oppressive?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, so feels like that felt outside falls outside of the definition of systemic oppression that you provided.
Well, well. Okay. I guess you can say. Well, no, not really, because again, that's kind of falls under the racist thing. I say a law that has something to do with race.
But that wouldn't necessarily be a law. It would just be an enactment, right? Or it would just be a practice.
So that's what I'm saying. It's how can by law officer even do that? So I think that's why I'm kind of confused about the question.
Okay. They do it all the time.
No, they don't. Situations I read is we are on top of stuff that they look at.
So we can look at it like, for example, here I can give you some examples, right? Where, or here, let's go to one that we can easily prove. If police officers chose to pull black drivers over just because they were black, would that be systemically oppressive if that was like a widespread and continual process?
First, you have to prove to me they're pulling them over simply because they're black.
Sure, let's do that. But if they were doing that, would that be systemically oppressive?
I won't necessarily say it's systemically oppressive. I just think that's a bias.
Yeah. So I think this is where we're running into a problem. I think your definition of systemic oppression is inadequate. Systemic oppression is any system that is acted upon that will cause differences in outcomes with depending on race or class or something else, right? So like something can be racially systemically oppressive. Something can be systemically oppressive to a certain class, right? Or someone can be systemically oppressive specifically to illegal immigrants, right? You can have oppression of different whatever, but the thing I'm going to be focusing on, the thing I'm going to focus on in this conversation is racially systemically oppressive,
okay.
Right? And so in this case, where if you're intentionally like causing additional harm to black people specifically because you're pulling them over because they're black, that would be systemically oppressive, because oppression is anything that harms or hinders the development, the success of any individuals, right? Like that's what oppression is, right? To intention.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I have a question for that. So, do black people oppress other black people?
Before we get to that, we have to come to a definition of oppression and make sure that we're crystal clear on that before we can have that conversation. Because no. To ask me if black people do what? Oppress other black people? I don't know what you mean by oppression. Wait, hold on. I don't know what you mean by oppression because we still haven't. My definition, before we can get there, which is what I was trying to say, we need to establish the definition of oppression and make sure that we're both in full understanding so that we can move forward in the conversation, and then you can apply it to questions like that.
That's not what you did, Fanatiq. That's not what you did. You just asked me my definition of systematic repression, I gave it to, and you asked me a question based on my definition.
Right,
So
and
I'm
but
doing
no,
the
no,
same thing you
no,
did.
no, 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 no. I asked you a question that fell outside of your definition in order to indicate that your definition of
But you still
oppression,
asked me a
in
question.
order to indicate that your definition of oppression was inadequate. I wasn't trying to apply your definition in order to like suss out like how you feel about it. I was asking a question specifically with the intention of helping you to come to the conclusion, which I see now failed, that your definition of oppression was inadequate because there's plenty of oppression that falls outside the scope of your definition. That was my reason for asking a question. I wasn't immediately applying what you were saying. I was showing you this thing that I'm questioning you on doesn't fall within your application. I mean, doesn't fall within your definition.
Okay, I got you.
So now what I'm doing is trying to define it more adequately so that we can move forward. And then you can ask me whatever questions you want
Well, what definition
once
you?
we have a working definition. What's that?
I was just asking whose definition are you using?
I was coming up with it off my head, but we can go ahead and use Merriam-Webster. Would you like to do that instead? Let's do that. I don't like proprietary definitions. You're right. Why would I do that? Okay. The oppression of a racial group. This is obviously talking about racial systemic oppression. The oppression of a racial group to the advantage of another as perpetuated by inequity within interconnected systems, such as political, economic, and social systems. Does that definition make sense to you?
Oh, you said this on Merriam-Webster?
Yes, it is.
Uh, I'm seeing unjust or cruel exercise of authority or power. Mm,
I'm sorry, that was systemic racism. Systemic racism. Let me see.
okay. So, okay, I just want to make sure I understand. Like I said, we're on both on the same page.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're looking up systemic racism, right?
That's what I was looking at. That is what I was reading, yeah.
Okay. Uh,
Because systemic oppression, I guess, isn't in the. That's not in the that Merriam-Webster doesn't have that.
okay. So the meaning was defined system of racism is a social political system that is based on racism and designed to perpetuate those principles. Uh, okay, a system of racism is a system that reinforces ideas of racial superiority and inferiority.
Wait, is that just
It separates.
racism? Because I'm looking at systemic
Well,
racism, and that's different.
yeah, I just. Well, are you on the actual like website reading it?
Yeah, Merriam-Webster.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is racism. So you say you put up systematic racism.
I'll turn me down a little bit. I looked up systemic racism. Systemic
Okay.
racism.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So they don't have it.
Wait, in Merriam-Webster?
Yeah. Say it's not in the dictionary.
I-
Did I
I'm
spell it
looking
right?
at it.
Never mind. I didn't spell it right. No,
Okay.
man.
Okay.
Okay. The oppression of a racial group to the advantage of another, as perpetrated by inequity within interconnected systems such as political, economic, and social systems.
Is that a
Okay.
good working definition for you?
Yeah, we can go with that.
Okay. So, um, if you intentionally were to, I don't know, pull black people over, search their vehicles to like look for drugs and things like that, and you did it to black people more than you did it to white people, meaning that because you do that, that you're more likely, because you're searching black people more frequently, you're going to find drugs more frequently on black people and be able to prosecute them and arrest them and put them into the system. And you're just, do you feel like that would be systemically racist?
No.
Would that, hmm, would that oppress them? Would that inhibit some of their development? Would that be, yeah, would that inhibit some of their development?
Not to me. No.
Being put in prison doesn't in, being put in prison doesn't inhibit your development?
If you committed a crime, you go to prison.
Okay. Does being put in prison inhibit your development?
No, I know people who went to prison and developed themselves while in prison.
This is going to be a rough one. Okay. I think you're
You never
having a
heard of anybody?
no. I think you're having a
You don't know?
problem. No, it's a comprehension problem. Saying
Okay.
something inhibits something doesn't mean it entirely prevents it, right? Like it's like, for instance, if I don't know, if I have like a not fully like I have a dam, right? Like I put a little blockade over a river, right? But it's not
Okay.
fully like completely preventing the water from going. It just it just like inhibits it to some degree. That'd be like an
Okay.
inhibition, right? Or maybe like a
Okay.
stern warning to a child can be an inhibitor, right? Where you can say, don't play in the street or don't do such and such, don't fight. That could be an inhibitor. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to prevent all fights, but that could be the thing that sticks in their mind that might make them potentially not do the thing. Simply saying that you can overcome an inhibition doesn't mean that doesn't mean that it's not an inhibitor. Like right, like
Okay. Okay.
religion or faith can be
Okay.
an inhibitor, but then like someone might
Okay.
decide, despite their religion or their faith, I'm still going to do something that I know I shouldn't be doing. That doesn't mean it's not an
Okay.
inhibitor.
I get what you're saying. Okay. I get what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
So to better answer your question, if they know they're committing a crime, no, it doesn't inhibit because they can just not do the crime and stay free and develop themselves.
Okay.
It's not the police officer's fault; it's the individual fault.
We're not talking about fault. I'm asking if putting someone in prison inhibits their development.
I don't think so. No.
Do you think if we were to just control for people who went to prison versus people who didn't, that we would find that people who didn't have any prison time? Okay. Well, let me just ask this. Going to prison gives you a criminal record. Does criminal record make you less likely to be employed?
Yeah, they do.
Okay. That's a form of development. Like employment is a way of achieving economic development, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Going to prison might prevent you from getting things like loans and stuff if you have a criminal record, right?
Right.
And then it also like inhibits your ability to really develop credit during the time that you're in prison, because in order to have credit, you need credit cards, you need to be able to use them, et cetera, et cetera. And so then that's obviously going to be an inhibition, which of course is going to prevent you from buying property, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like it prevents you from developing your family, right? All of these things, these are all inhibitions. Those are all developmental areas that are inhibited by being in prison. Like what do
Right.
you mean?
And that's why you avoid prison
I get
by
you.
not committing crime.
I totally agree. You should avoid prison by not doing crime so that you don't have your development inhibited. But the original question I asked you was, does going to prison inhibit development? And it sounded like you gave a really ridiculous answer that it doesn't, but I just explained to you several ways that it does inhibit your development. Do you agree with the
Yeah, you
examples I
can't.
get? Right. Do you agree with the examples I gave you for how it inhibits your development?
I agree with those individual examples, but you can still develop your brain by reading. You can still develop your body by working out. You can still develop connections. So you can still develop while still in prison.
I totally agree with you. You can still develop,
Okay.
but that's why I said it inhibits. It inhibits. To inhibit something doesn't
Yeah,
have
it
to.
inhibits some.
I didn't
Yeah,
say
it
it.
inhibits some.
Right there we go. So yeah, like again, inhibitions can be overcome, right?
Okay.
So
Right.
so it does inhibit development.
Some, yes.
Okay. So then, if something is inhibiting your development, then that would be a form of oppression.
No. Because you have the choice to not do a crime or do a crime. That's
Okay.
not nobody's forcing anybody to commit crimes.
Yes, but if someone only chooses to enforce, right, enforce like those crimes, if someone chooses to enforce that specifically against a very
Well,
specific group of people, then that's what we would call oppression, because again, this is the oppression of a racial group, right? And we already know putting people in prison and putting people in the criminal justice system is inhibiting their development, right? That's that so you would be doing that specifically to black people. That would be the racial group, to the advantage of another. White people have the privilege of not being inhibited in this way, right? as perpetuated by inequity, meaning that you're doing it more to some people than you are to the others within interconnected systems, which of course I just already explained to you how the prison system impacts the economic system and obviously political system is like interacts with the criminal justice system, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm explaining to you, what I just basically broke down to you these are the ways that would be oppressive.
No. And my question is, why are black people more police?
Well, let's look at some of those things. Well, if we find out, okay, when it came towards black people, with them searching their cars, do you know that black people are significantly less likely to have contraband and drug paraphernalia within their cars, yet they are searched significantly more? So I need you to explain that to me because I don't have the answer. The only answer that makes sense to me is racism. Police officers are significantly more likely to check the cars of black people than white people, despite the fact that white people are significantly more likely to have drug paraphernalia and contraband in their cars. So why are police searching black people more despite that?
I appreciate you asking. So I know you don't know, but I grew up in Memphis, so I grew up around black people. And there's a high homicide rate amongst black people. Black people kill each other most of any other race. We
This has
steal
nothing to
amongst
do with
each
my
other.
question.
You just asked me. I'm answering your question.
No,
You
you're
said
not.
why do police? You said why do police? Why do police black neighborhoods the most?
That's not what I asked. That's not what I asked. That's not what I asked. I'm sorry. You were answering a question I
What you,
didn't ask. I thought you were doing that. Thank you for confirming it for me. I did not say anything about black neighborhoods. That's not what I said at all. Did you not hear my
black
question?
people?
I'm sorry. Here, let me
What's your
explain it.
question?
I got you. Yeah. If you can answer my question, you need to understand the question, right? Before you can answer my
Okay.
question. So I'm going to say it one more time. Actually, listen this time. What I said was, why, given the fact that white people are significantly more likely to have drug paraphernalia and contraband in their cars, so searches of white vehicles yield more drug paraphernalia and contraband, and so aka positive results, than searches of black people's cars. Despite that, officers are significantly more likely to search the vehicles of black people. Why is that?
Oh, so you think police officers just search for drugs? Is that what you think they only search for?
White people yield more drugs and weapons in their searches than black people.
So to understand your question, I want to make sure I'm understanding is, do you think that's the only thing police are looking for?
I'm sorry, I just elucidated. White people carry more drugs and weapons, and despite that, police officers are significantly more likely to search black people's cars. So they look for drugs and weapons, and
So
despite
they
that,
don't look for warrants. They don't look for warrants.
you don't need to search a car to look for a warrant. What are you talking about?
No. I'm saying if somebody has a warrant and they see somebody, if they have a warrant for somebody and they see them in their car, is that not a reason to stop them as well?
They don't know that they have the warrant when they stop them. What?
So you don't know police officers check license plates before sometimes a lot of time they pull people over?
Okay, so look, so the largest study ever done to date on this subject, actually, it was a study in which they discovered that that police officers are significantly more likely to pull over black people than white people in routine traffic stops, by the way. And what they discovered is once you get into what they called dusk and dawn, where there's a veil of darkness, because I'm pretty sure you can recognize this when you're like driving around dusk and dawn, you can't tell the race of an individual because there's like a shadow over everyone because it's not well lit enough in order to like be able to highlight the lack of melanin in Caucasians. So because of that, now we see this disparity in pullover rates suddenly disappear. So if the disparity disappears when you can't tell the race of the individuals, then that means that the reason why the police officers are pulling them over is because of race in a large amount of these cases. Is that reasonable?
No.
What is your explanation for why there's this drop off in pullover rates at dusk and dawn? Or this drop off in pullover disparities at dusk and dawn?
I'm not even sure how that's
You
relevant
didn't
because
understand it, huh? Can you go? Hey, before you can answer
no,
that,
no, no,
then I feel like you don't understand. Can you explain to me what am I asking you?
no.
What am I asking you to explain to me? Because I don't think you understand it.
You're asking me why is their pullover rate is dropping when it's dust and dawn when you can't tell if somebody's race.
Not the. I didn't say pullover rate. Well, it's not just the pullover rate. That's not what it is. What is it? Did you hear it?
No, I did. What was the other
Yeah, I
part?
figured you didn't understand it. So it was a difference in disparity. So like they pull over more black people than they do in white people in the daytime when they can see the
Well,
difference
no,
of the race people.
that's
But the
no, no.
disparity,
What I'm saying
hold
is,
on, hold on. But I'm saying, but the disparity that disappears when you get into dusk and dawn. Why?
I don't know why. That's not something.
Could it
I drive
could
all
it
the
be
way.
could it be
No, not,
racism? Could it be racism?
no, no, because I never got pulled over unless I committed a crime.
So wait, you've never been pulled over unless you've committed a crime, but these studies are done for all people. And it seems that these things came to the conclusion that there is a disparity in pulling over people. So then what is your response to the data?
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm not
My
asking you about your
response
personal
is
experience. You said because I'm not being pulled over unless I committed a crime. But what the data indicates is that they do pull over people even when they're not guilty of a crime. And that these traffic stops, the disparity disappears once you can't tell the difference in race by just simple observation with an ocular pat down.
so the reason I said me because I'm black, and if it was based on race, I would be affected by it as well. So that's why I know it's not based on race.
Oh,
So
anecdotal
that's what.
Andy. Bro, I can't. Listen, I'm asking you what's your response to the
Oh,
data. I'm asking you about the data.
I don't cut you off. I don't cut you off. I've been very respectful and I listen to you. And I answer the question.
You're not answering the question because I'm asking you about the data and you're talking about you. And I'm asking you what's the difference in the data.
No, because you did that before. When I said something about the warrants, you just went to a whole other thing. It didn't even stay on that. So you're choosing to jump around when I answer your questions, and then when
Okay.
I give you an answer, you just if you don't accept, it, you just want to choose. But no, that's my answer.
Okay. I'm
It's not
sorry.
an
So
answer.
then please answer the question. What is the difference in data? What is the cause of the difference in the data, if not
Okay,
racism? Your answer was that I
that
don't know. You didn't have an answer.
right because I never looked into the dust and being pulled over between dust and dawn. I never looked into that, so I can't just give you some bullshit answer.
Right.
So,
So the only answer
so
you can't even imagine an answer. So the only answer that I can think of is racism, and you're saying it's not racism, even though you've never looked at the
right.
data, even though you can't think of any other plausible answer. You can't provide one.
Well, no, I do. I do know the answer.
What's
Well,
the
no, no, no. Let me phrase it. Let me phrase it. Let me phrase it. Because I do. I know it's not race because race is irrelevant when it comes to in today's time when it comes to being pulled over.
okay?
Because if you look at because you keep bringing up data, but you refuse to bring up the data how black people make up 13% of the population, but commit almost half the murders, about 40% of the murders. But they upset because police officer police black people a little more.
Yeah,
Well,
I get it.
so I'm saying, how can you really bring up Dustin Dawn but not bring up black people committing murders as a reason? That's what really confuses me.
Okay, I'll tell you. I know a lot of no. This entire conversation has been confusing you. The reason why I bring those things up is because those things are clear indications of systemic racism, right? And so if you can't understand something as simple as a very obvious data field argument that there's obviously disparities in pullover rates, then that means that yeah, you're going to really struggle with like understanding any of the other things, right? So in this
No,
situation,
let's go with it. Let's go with it. Let's say you're right. Well, how does that impact a black person if they didn't commit a crime? They just got pulled over. How does that impact them?
well, police sometimes can plant evidence. We see evidence of that, right? We see that like black men are exonerated. Like there's like 1,300 exonerations of black men. Furthermore, like literally getting like traffic tickets, like ends up creating financial burdens, which black people end up bearing the brunt of when it comes to criminal justice. People who have warrants Like sometimes police will exacerbate problems violating their probation, or I mean, like people who are on probation, violating their probation, things like that, causing additional complications. So all of these things, when you start looking at these things on a large scale, it does start having like pretty grand impacts on on people. I would say that's just one facet of systemic racism, which exists, but you don't have an answer for it. But then, okay, I think that proves my point that it does exist. I would say then when it comes to things like loans, when it comes to loans for black people, and we know that there's crazy disparities in lending practices when it comes to banks for black people, even when we control for income and credit score. Break that down to me.
Okay.
Is that systemically racist?
Okay. No.
So
But this is why.
Go ahead.
No, I got you. No. So let me answer my first question when I said what was happening. So I said, just say what you're saying is true, and black people are being held up, or less during dusk, or if it's not dusk or dawn, it's in the daytime with more black people, there's a disparity of black people being pulled over. So my question was, if they wasn't committing a crime, how did that negatively affect them? So one, you said they could be planning something. You say around 1,300 black people have been exonerated or in some sense because of a false charge or whatever the case may be. Okay. So in 2023, there was 50,000 black arrests in the country. And if you're saying 1,300 were exonerated, that's less than 1% of total black people being arrested.
But
all right.
arrest doesn't mean conviction.
That's right. I said arrested.
So these numbers don't add up.
Okay, let's look at conviction then. I was trying to keep it simple. How many people were convicted? Okay. All right, so let's see. Where is it? I need the whole number.
I think the problem you're going to run into is that the exoneration rate doesn't mean that they exonerated all of the individuals who were falsely accused or who were wrongfully accused, right?
That's irrelevant. My point
is...
Oh,
no, it's not irrelevant. It's not irrelevant.
No, it is. No, it'd be relevant if it was like 50% of all convention. If you're telling me something that happens in 1% of all conviction, it's irrelevant.
First off, I don't know that it would be 1% of all convictions, but here's the thing. Again, I think you're missing the point. I know its comprehension is really difficult. So listen, the idea is if these 1,300 exonerations are only the ones in which we have clear evidence to prove that the things were planted. How many cases go by in which we don't have any evidence and those people are still like that their convictions are still upheld, right? Or like there was that recent guy who was executed. I want to say it was in Texas. I can't remember, but it was I believe it was in Texas, where a guy was executed even though like they had evidence that he wasn't guilty. That case still wasn't exonerated, right? So the fact of the matter is, like wrongful convictions get in the way. Furthermore, even if I don't get charged or arrested or any of things, say I'm on my way to work, now I get an infraction at my job. That's another inconvenience, right? And now I might lose my job simply because of that. So that would be another form of that. That's another way that these things can impact me. Ultimately, like, and again, and even if there's no permanent,
I wasn't done answering. I just let you skip over me. I wasn't done answering.
You took a long pause to look up. No. You were done because you took a long pause to look up the information, and while you were looking up the information, I began speaking. Is what happened because you didn't have it on hand. So while you were looking up that information, because when I did so earlier, I did so while you were talking. So you looked up that information, and while you were doing that, I began making my point, which I'm going to finish now. So the thing that I was saying was, the fact is, even if it doesn't result in an arrest, even if it doesn't result in anything beyond traffic court, that's still a financial impediment. You can still make someone lose their job, even if you don't even give them a ticket, just wasting that time on the way when someone's on their way to work. I normally leave, and I don't really leave myself much of a grace window whenever I go to work. I don't. That's just me. If I know I got to be there at 15 minutes, I normally leave the house maybe around 13 minutes. If I get pulled over randomly by a police officer, it would be a problem. I would be late for work. It would be outside of my control, and my jobs need me, so I wouldn't have to be worried about that. But for some people, it doesn't work that way. So, fact of the matter is, those things are impediments. And I also, again, I asked you specifically about banking and the fact that banks tend to tend to discriminate against black people with their lending practices, despite credit scores and despite incomes. I would say that would be obviously oppression of a racial group to the advantage of another if they're literally lending to white people so that they can develop homes and they can buy cars and things at lower interest rates versus black people, even when we control for better income and better credit score. But I know you're going to go ahead and ignore that point.
No, I was getting to it once I got to my first, but the answer to that, black people deny more black people than white banks. Black banks deny more black people than white banks. So, but we don't say there's oppression there. So, meaning black people give more bank loan or mortgage loans to white people than they do black people. So it's not having nothing to do with race. And more because on average, black people on average have the lowest credit score among all races. And so again, nobody wants to talk about that. It's because we don't talk about financial literacy in our homes in a general sense. Again, we don't have two parent households. Again, so these are the issues that we think racism is. It's lack of two parent household, lack of financial education in our homes, lack of graduating at the national level, lack of God, and just lack of decency.
Penny,
That's what we're lacking.
Penny.
That's what we're lacking over. Hold on. I mean, dang, can I please get it out?
Oh, I thought you
I've let you. I
paused.
let,
You paused, but go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So, like I said, racism is not the issue. Black banks have denied more black loans than white banks, meaning black banks have given more loans to white people than they do black people. So it has nothing to do with race. Black people have, on average, has the lowest credit score than any other race in the country. That's a fact. So to bank everything on race is just childish. And it takes away personal responsibility. And when I say personal responsibility, black people are not marrying at over a 50% clip. We raising kids at a 80% at a single parent home. We're not graduating at the national average, which it is declining.
Yeah.
So you're not declining, but we're not graduating at the national average. We're not focusing on financial literacy in a general sense at home. But we're not focused on bringing focus on God at home. See, I think the fact that we don't focus on it is easy to say is racism. People don't like us because we're black. Where if you actually deal with people on a consistent basis, which I do, nobody cares about your race. Nobody. I know officers. I know white officers. I know black. I know Hispanic officers. I know Asian officers. Nobody cares about what race you are. I think black people got to get off this high horse to think that, oh, just because I'm black they hate me. Nobody cares. Everybody got their own problems, and everything you just said about being stopped are minor inconveniences. If somebody get a ticket, so what? You go to court. If you did do it, you fight it. If you did it, pay the ticket. If you're late for work, you are not the only person. White people have been late for work from being held up by a police officer. Other races have been held up from work, have been let out by being held up by a police officer. So try to take these minor inconveniences, act like this some big deal. Who cares? So, and again, like my point at the end of the day, even if we double the 1,300 exonerated people who into 2,600, if you want to round up to 3,000, that has nothing to do with the millions of people who still been convicted, which is again less than 2%, if that. So it's not a big deal. When you start getting a big deal is when stuff is start creeping to 10, 20, maybe 30, for sure 30, 40%. So we have to address the crime rate. Before we even talk about other races, let's address why black people do the things to other black people. Like I don't know where
All
you
right,
grew
you're
up from.
grandstanding
I
now.
grew up.
You're definitely grandstanding now. You're just going on a monologue. You're not engaging in a conversation. You're just wanting to voice
I'm
all of your
sorry. Go
points
ahead.
that literally had nothing to do with my point. So I'll go ahead and end it here. Look, it's really simple. And I think this is a problem of comprehension because I already addressed the I already addressed the credit score thing. You brought up that black people
No,
have
you
lower,
didn't.
yes, I did. You brought up that black people have lower
I'm
credit score.
asking you a question.
You brought up, if I got to mute you, I'll mute you. It's
Answer
okay.
the
I'll
question.
mute you. So you brought up that black people have lower credit scores on average than white people do. You brought that up. And but that was after I already said, if we control specifically for higher credit scores and higher income with black people, we still find disproportionate denials. But you can't comprehend that because your comprehension is pretty bad. So despite me already controlling for that thing, I mentioned it and you still brought it up. Well, black people have lower credit scores on average. And that might be true. That has nothing to do with the data I'm talking about because the data I'm talking about specifically controls for higher income and higher credit score black people. Furthermore, you mentioned black people. Black banks loan more to white people than they do to black people. That might be true. I don't know if that's controlling per capita, and I also don't know if that's controlling for credit scores and income. Because if we're controlling for those two factors, which are the two largest determining factors for your loans, if those things are being controlled for and we're still finding a disparity, that means people do care about rates. So then if we look at those kinds of things, and then we also look at things like, I don't know, you consider the fact that, what was it, when it comes to applying for a job, resumes were throwing out people for having black sounding names. Then more recently, they had another study where they paired people, black felons and white felons, and they found that white people with felonies still got way more callbacks than black people. But then it got even worse when they discovered that white felons got more callbacks for job for interviews and got more job offerings than black people with no criminal degree. So you can lie to yourself and say people don't care about race, but it's very evident through that study that they very clearly do. Because a black person with no criminal record with an identical resume still had less job offerings than a white person with an identical resume but a felony. So that means that those employers, on average, did care about race. When we start controlling for credit score and we find that banks are unwilling to loan towards black people despite having higher credit scores and income, then that means that race is obviously a factor when it comes to them. You can pretend that no one cares about race, but it's obvious that they do. When we look and we find out that black people are being searched more than white people, despite the fact that they have less likely of a chance of having paraphernalia, and we find that that disappears once the veil of darkness is there, so that we know that now that they can't tell that you're black before they pull you over, this disparity disappears. That means that they are specifically targeting black people. They do care about race. When we look and we see that the mug shots that they're using specifically in these Florida police stations for target practice are black people, that means that they do care about race. So when we start seeing differences in the way that the country is willing to treat people, and the laws and things in the black codes that they created, or when we start looking at things like, I don't know, home appraisals, and we find that black people are having their homes appraised at a very lower rate than white people, that means that they do care about race. So all of these things indicate very obviously that they care about race. You just want to be ignorant to the facts of the matter. So yeah, we can end the conversation there. I appreciate you for your time. If you want to have more of these kind of conversations, again, comprehension is incredibly important, because if I'm specifically mentioning credit scores as the control, and then you just bring up the general stat about credit scores, it shows that you weren't either listening or not able to comprehend, both of which are not conducive for a good conversation. But I appreciate you, bro.
Escape